privilege to introduce our chief guest for the day, Shri S. Krishnan. He does not need any introduction to this audience in Chennai. He is a very distinguished senior member of the Indian Administrative Service of the Tamil Nadu cadre and is currently Secretary at the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. He has held key leadership roles in Government of Tamil Nadu over the years, including as Additional Chief Secretary in the Department of Industries, and now leads India's digital and technological initiatives, including AI, semiconductors, and data protection frameworks. He has been a great friend to the Deccan Centre, and we appreciate his support for this conference. We are truly honored to have him with us today. May I request Shri S. Krishnan to kindly deliver the inaugural address.
Apologize for my inability to be present in person in Chennai for this event, much as I would have loved to have been there. I guess, it's difficult to get away and come back to Chennai and be at home more often than I really can afford, but it would have been wonderful to have been present in person. Let me first compliment the Deccan Centre and Ambassador Dhirubhai in particular for having put together this wonderful event. Although the Deccan Centre is in infancy in terms of being a very newly set up organization, it comes with a lot of thought and comes with a lot of planning behind it in terms of what its task would be and what it is setting out to achieve. I'm personally aware of that, and clearly, when you've planned adequately, it's possible to execute effectively and start the process of execution early, and that is on display here today. It's a very distinguished set of speakers that you have assembled for this particular event. I'm very glad to note that Professor Ravindran from IIT Madras will be there. He is our expert from India in the space of AI governance. He has contributed significantly to the report which was prepared under the chairmanship of the Principal Scientific Advisor, Dr. Ajay Sood, on AI governance, something which was commissioned by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. And the recommendations in the report is what led to the constitution of the AI governance and economy group. A combination of what was recommended by the group chaired by the principal scientific advisor and what came out in the economic survey for 25-26, where a number of earlier this year, at the end of January this year, which basically highlighted how AI is becoming a horizontal technology affecting various other segments of the economy, and therefore it requires an overall approach towards how we not only deal with the governance question, but also deal with the economic impact questions. When we considered the recommendations of both of these groups in the ministry, it was felt that the most appropriate approach would be to integrate both these trains of thought and put it together as a common group which would sort of look at this issue on an interministerial basis, and that led to the foundation or the formation of the AI GEG, as it is now called. But we are in a very, very fast changing environment. When the guidelines report was published, AI governance guidelines report was published after extensive consultation, at that stage, the thinking was still very clearly that AI as a technology, we need to be careful that, we do not stifle it, we do not stymie it early in its evolution by constraining it too much with legislation and regulation. This was a conscious approach of the government. This is a conscious thought that we had. And we also believed, and I still hold that belief, that there are many aspects of regulation and many aspects of legislation which are still available as tools which we can use to regulate certain aspects of AI, or certain aspects of the way AI itself is built or the way it is used in different sectors of the economy or in different sectors of society. So there are there are tools in our toolkit already to regulate some of these aspects. So a separate legislation or a separate set of rules are not required immediately to deal with these issues. This was a conscious thought. For instance, today's conference is entitled, it's about AI governance, ethics, data protection, and legal framework. So if you look at the data protection part of what needs to be looked at, the data protection part is something which really is dealt with under the DPDP Act, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which came out in 2023, and the rules were also brought out in 2025, again, after very extensive consultation, which also helped in the process of building awareness. One of the lessons that we learned in the process of actually consulting for the finalization of the DPDP rules is that it's a very effective way to actually make sure that awareness about the kind of regulation which is coming up is built up across society. So wherever possible, extensive consultation certainly helps in that regard. So the DPDP Act, in a sense, in India, strikes a balance between what is the approach to regulating personal data and privacy in, say, the European Union, as opposed to the approach which is taken in the United States. So it strikes that balance. It's one of those truly Goldilocks pieces of legislation where it is just right in terms of not being overly intrusive and at the same time ensuring that privacy of individual citizens is protected, and the orders of the Supreme Court are duly observed, because the Supreme Court, in its famous judgment, had sort of established the right to privacy as a part of the fundamental rights, and enjoined the government to make sure that it was protected in an effective way. And in that sense, the DPDP Act achieved that balance. And also, it made sure that we as individuals truly are the data principles, and we have a right to determine how our data is used. And data cannot be used without the specific consent of individuals to whom the data relates. So I think in that sense, it laid down a framework in which it could be worked, and at the same time, with consent and within that framework, and ensuring that the anonymity and the privacy element is protected, there are also provisions as to how the data itself can be used on a more wide basis. And as we are well aware, data is one of the most fundamental things that you need in the space of for developing AI, for building models, and for the way that it actually goes across different sectors and becomes a technology which you can use across different sectors. So since data is so fundamental to this, the data governance aspect and looking at how exactly the data is put together is something which is very important, and which I think through legislation, at least the personal data has been clearly protected. As far as other forms of data are concerned, what the government has been attempting to do, and is an exercise which is still being rolled out, is to make sure that our data is made available in a readable and in a machine readable, compatible format, so that it can be more extensively used. The AI course platform set up under the India AI mission is something which offers today more than 10,000 data sets for use across various sectors. The latest Economist carries this write-up about how data structures in India are being changed by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in order to make data more usable across. So there are a number of efforts across government which are being taken up to look at how data itself is to be used. There's also an ongoing debate on how whether data is something which can be transferred, or whether we need to ensure that data stays within the country, since that is one of the big assets, in a sense, that India possesses, given the size of the nation, given the volume of data that we generate. and something which many companies, technology companies and others would be very interested in. Now, we've taken an approach currently in a regulatory fashion saying that as a rule, the Digital Data Protection Act does not require that all data should be located in India or that it should not be transferred across borders. There is no bar against transfer, but it empowers regulators in specific sectors, say the financial sector or the health sector, to ensure that or to sort of have certain restrictions on the way that data itself gets shared. This is to protect both financial interests. This is to protect data which could prove to be sensitive. It could be a number of other aspects. So a balance has been struck there in terms of where we believe that it would not be in the interest of the country to actually share the data. You apply your mind and figure out that in these categories, data would not get shared, whereas in other categories, data can be shared, and that is something which can sort of be enabled in due course of time. So the data governance picture, in a sense, is more or less in place, and we should be in a position to regulate our concerns relating to the data. Now, the other aspect is the legal framework. Now, as far as the legal framework itself is concerned, for the present, and I mean that as we on today's date, I think the recommendation of the subgroup, which is chaired by the principal scientific advisor and brought out the report on governance guidelines, still has it right that, of course, you'd hear more extensively on that subject from Professor Ravindran, but my belief is that the existing legal framework still works in certain areas. One of the serious concerns that we have is, for instance, how deep fakes are used and how misinformation can prevail in the AI world. There are existing provisions of law, including in the IT Act and including in the BNS, the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, which can take care of this aspect of misrepresentation. Misrepresentation was a crime even before AI came into such common use, and technologies to create deep fakes was not as advanced as it is today. So to that extent, there is an existing framework which has proved reasonably effective in order to tackle the concerns about deepfakes. Of course, there are repeated demands and there are concerns that we need to sort of legislate more strictly in this space, and we need to look at this space more closely. The ministry itself has made certain changes and amendments to the IT intermediary guidelines rules in order to make sure that these concerns to some extent are addressed. And thus far, we believe that these changes of guidelines and these changes of the rules have been reasonably successful in making sure that our concerns are effectively addressed. So I would say that in some ways, the existing legal framework, at least as far as deepfakes and misrepresentation, is reasonably adequate. Although I must concede that parliamentary committees and others have been repeatedly emphasizing that we need to be prepared with more stringent laws and better laws to address these areas of concern. And those are recommendations that we are currently examining and seeing what can be done. Now, there are other aspects of AI as well. One other aspect is, especially when you're looking at data, is about copyright violations and what happens with copyrights and what happens with the creator economy, what happens with people who produce a lot of creative content, and how do we treat those requirements. There's currently a working paper which the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, DPIIT, has put out, and which is currently under discussion. And I guess there's a lot of feedback on that aspect. There are certain criticisms of certain recommendations which are contained in the working paper. And I'm sure most of those will be taken on board. the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology themselves have a set of views on how this particular issue needs to be approached. Again, it's a matter of striking a balance between the creative rights of people and the way that AI, and for AI to really do well, having greater access to data. I mean, these two need to be sort of resolved, and this is something which is an ongoing battle, and I think we will find a suitable solution to this. Of course, this matter is also before several courts across the country, including the Delhi High Court. And periodically, the courts have also granted certain rights for people in the creative sector, including personality rights. So all of these aspects need to be looked at least insofar as the data protection aspect of the creative rights and copyrights in intellectual property is concerned. So this is again a matter which is in dispute, not just in India, but across the world. So these are all areas where I think, in a sense, existing law is taking care of some of these concerns. Now, a new threat, and as many of you are aware, the impact of AI on cybersecurity is something which has now emerged as a very real threat. It was something which was always expected to come up, and now it's come up in very real terms with the release of MeitY by Anthropic, and the concerns around that have led to a lot of discussions within the government. The government is speaking to Anthropic on the concerns in this area. Yesterday, day before evening, the Computer Emergency Response Team India, which is an agency under MeitY, which looks after cybersecurity, after extensive consultations, has put out a set of guidelines and an advisory on how this particular issue needs to be handled. We've had meetings with the financial sector, the finance minister and the minister for electronics and information technology addressed all the leading bankers and other financial institutions in order to alert them to where this threat lies and how this particular area needs to be looked at. Similarly, with the power sector, with the aviation sector, with the telecom sector, and all the other critical sectors of the economy, we have been alerting our teams to see how exactly we can address these concerns and these threats. Now, here is where I come to an important element of the ethics of this entire framework. Now, in the AI governance guidelines report, which was presented to MeitY, one of the critical sessions was a voluntary compliance framework. As many of you are aware, one element of this voluntary compliance framework was also something which came out during the AI summit, where all the leading makers of of models across the world, including some of the Indian entrepreneurs who have been supported for making models, came out and made a voluntary commitment on data use and certain other aspects, ethical aspects of model building. Now, the report itself, the governance guidelines report itself, recommended that we should encourage as many of these voluntary compliance frameworks as possible. And I think it's a very, very sensible and good suggestion for a number of reasons. I think to begin with, it's important to obtain the willing consent and the willing acquiescence, in a sense, for many of the leading companies in this space to actually adhere to a code of ethics, which would be in a broader public interest. And I think that is very important. The second thing is, in areas of emerging technology, the technology in many ways is ahead of the law, and how far ahead of the law and what the consequences of some of this technology would be is something which is best known only to the creators of the technology itself. So actually bringing them on to the side of how the legal framework will evolve is a very sound way of going forward. So in that sense, I think it's an unexceptionable suggestion, still valid, still being acted on by the government. So that is one element of it. Now, there are ethical dimensions. In a way, when you even look at the mythos anthropic issue, the one of the key elements and one of the reasons why we are closely engaging with Anthropic to figure out how exactly we go about protecting ourselves, um, given various restrictions there would be across various laws of various countries. I think it's important also to recognize that not every company which produces models of this kind will necessarily behave in the same fashion. And even if you have a voluntary framework, how you enforce the voluntary framework and how you make sure that there is compliance will always be a bit of a question, and which we have to be very alert to tackling. So we are at a very interesting and a very critical phase, in a sense, for use of a better word, a very pregnant kind of situation where a number of key decisions need to be taken. They should not be too hasty, they should be thoughtful. We need the willing cooperation of a broad cross section of stakeholders, and this can't be a regulation which is imposed or something which is enforced in some ways, as some other legislations can be. I mean, for instance, if you take the legislation on online banning online money games, that's clearly an area where we can legislate in a particular way. But within technology space and within the tech policy space, clearly how we legislate on this aspect of use of AI is something which needs to be carefully thought through, and where I think in addition to ensuring that innovation is not stifled, we also need to ensure that there is voluntary or willing compliance and willing cooperation in order to make sure that this framework evolves in a way that becomes implementable. I think these are all factors which need to be kept in mind as the governance framework itself evolves. At the same time, I think I'll have to emphasize that, and this is something that we have said in the past, that as far as the government is concerned, we watch this very closely. And when there is a need to legislate or when there is a need to regulate, we will not step back, and we will sort of step in where there is a necessity, and we will, to the extent possible, do this after adequate consultation and after adequate reflection with all the concerned parties. So let me assure you that from every angle, from the angle that AI can be a force for good, which is the belief that the government has, that we are actually at the cusp of a technology which can take us to the next level of development and help us achieve this goal of being a Viksit Bharat by 2047. And therefore, we need to use this technology as effectively as possible. And that in itself is an ethical question, that, where a technology offers the prospect of economic advancement and prosperity, we need as a government to make sure that it is most effectively harnessed and used. And at the same time, we sort of put in whatever safeguards are needed to ensure that people are protected and the people of this country are protected. And that, I think, is the key and operative phase, the people of this country. I mean, that is the responsibility of this government, and that's the area where we need to focus on, and which then also means that it's very, very critical to build domestic capacity in the AI space, in this technology space for India. India has a natural endowment in terms of the kind of talent which is available, which is why in the Stanford Index and elsewhere, we are seen as number 3 in the AI Vibrancy Index, primarily on the basis of the kind of talent that we have in this country. In the AI mission, in the India AI mission, we have attempted to make sure that in terms of the infrastructure requirements of compute facility, of data sets and model building, we support Indian entrepreneurs, Indian academic institutions, including IIT Madras, including IIT Bombay and others, which are developing capacities in this area to make sure that we have domestic options in this in the AI space, and we have options by which we can protect our own cybersecurity space, and we have mechanisms by which this can be done. So clearly, all I would like to say at this time is that AI itself poses a number of challenges, as it poses, of course, or offers a huge set of opportunities for economic advancement. How we deal with these challenges, how we are on the ball and make sure that we respond in a timely fashion to the kind of challenges which get thrown up is what is important. And gatherings like this, where these issues are discussed, are extremely valuable to us. Mention was made of the AI Summit. It was a huge event, a huge success, which placed India firmly as one of the leading countries in the world, particularly from the global south, to think about all of these issues on AI as the next most important horizontal technology which has come up in the world. And clearly, India is part of this discourse. And this discourse needs to be deepened, needs to be spread wider, needs to be spread across the country. And a range of people need to discuss this to go forward. A number of key measures on AI governance were announced and were taken up in as part of the AI summit as well. Governance guidelines were issued, frameworks were talked about. A number of those initiatives will be followed up. I'm sure during the course of today, you will discuss each of these initiatives. And we need to build not just the awareness, but also the consensus around which we approach these key questions of AI governance to make sure that we are able to harness this technology as something that truly contributes to the growth and development of this country and protects our people from whatever possible harms there are. So let me once again compliment the Deccan Centre for organizing this event. I look forward to the kind of recommendations which will come out through the various discussions you have today. And I'm sure that it will be a key contribution to our own internal discussions. Once again, you have a wonderful collection of people who are speaking to you today, starting undoubtedly with Professor Ravindran, and I'm sure this would be a very, very exciting and useful conference with true outcomes which will help us and guide us in our further policy making. Thank you very much for having me on this occasion.
Sir, I thank you for your insightful speech, which has set the tone for this conference.